Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Adrian Pandev, business and immigration attorney, and today we're going to continue our talk about the E-2 visa and specifically the E-2 work permit. Now, its background, certain E-2 visa holders are eligible for employment authorization. Now, the first one is the E-2 principal, right? The principal investor, the main applicant who applies for the E-2 visa is eligible for employment authorization. However, the E-2 principal is only eligible to work for the company, for the organization that sponsored the visa, right? The primary organization here. Now, the E-2 principal spouse, right, is eligible for general employment authorization, work authorization in the United States. So what that means is that the individual can work anywhere as long as the job doesn't require the individual to have a security clearance, or the job is only limited to U.S. citizens. These are mainly government and government contract jobs. The individual, the E-2 dependent spouse, right, is eligible to work anywhere in the United States. They can start their own company, they can work for the E-2 principal business, or they can work anywhere else, right? Now, regarding the E-2 work permit itself, years ago, the E-2 spouse, dependent spouse, had to file a separate application for employment authorization, and only after they received the employment authorization document, the card itself, was the E-2 dependent spouse allowed to start working. Now, this has changed. The employment authorization was incident to status, and what that means is that the spouse can work the moment they obtain E-2 status. So just to explain this more clearly, so if your spouse is the E-2 principal and your spouse has received an E-2 principal visa, then you as their spouse can apply for an E-2 visa as well, and you will be considered an E-2 dependent spouse. Your visa is linked to the principal. Now, the moment you receive that visa, or if you're applying for a change of status, the moment you receive your approval notice that you're now in E-2 status, from then on, you have work authorization, employment authorization to work in the United States. There's no need to file any extra applications for employment authorization as of the shooting of this video in January 2025. One thing to note, right? Children. This often comes up. Dependent children who are eligible for E-2 dependent status as well, so these would be children under 21, they're not eligible for employment authorization. They're eligible for the E-2 dependent visa and status, but not employment authorization. So the E-2 employment authorization is only given to the spouse of the E-2 principal. One thing I want to note here, because a lot of times this comes up, the free employment authorization, right? The fact that the E-2 dependent spouse does not have to work for the E-2 company, but rather can work freely in the United States, provides for a lot of planning opportunity. So very often, because the spouse receives a greater benefit in a lot of ways, because you're not limited to just one single company or one single organization, a lot of times it's worth considering and planning who will be the principal E-2 investor applicant and who will be the spouse, because in some cases what I see very often is sometimes one of the, in the couple, one of the two members of the married couple has, entrepreneurial spirit. They want to open more than one business. They have several different ideas they want to try. Well, it might make sense for that individual not to be the principal applicant, but rather to be the E-2 dependent spouse. Similarly, certain professions, for example, I see this a lot with engineering, finance, etc., where there's a lot of job opportunity and frankly high pay in the U.S. In those cases, it makes sense for that spouse who has that career or those professional background to be the E-2 spouse, so they can seek out jobs outside of the E-2 business in the United States. So anyway, the bottom line is, the spouse of the E-2 principal is eligible for employment authorization, and remember that this provides for some very good creative planning that you can use to bring out the maximum advantages and benefits out of your E-2 visa. Thank you so much for watching. I'll continue to post videos. I hope you find it helpful, and if you have any additional ideas for topics or anything, please add them in the comments and I'll try to cover those as well. Thank you.